Hello and welcome to another comedian's interview for my blog and podcast, A Rich Comic Life. My name is Richard Gill and my blog describes my experiences of watching over 1,000 comedians over the last 48 years. I'm delighted to welcome my guest today, the wonderful comedian Alex Hylton. Yeah!
Hi. Hello, thank you for having me. It's nice to be here.
Hello,
by
mate.
here, I mean my own house, but it's nice to be talking to you.
Good man. Well, it's a pleasure to see you, and thanks so much for doing this. It's going to be an interview about your comedy career, and we're going to go right back to the start. And if you can tell me, please, how did you become a comedian in the first place?
Not very well is how I became a comedian. I started comedy when I was 18, so sort of 9 years ago. I went to university and decided I wanted to do it. I was really into comedy, much like yourself, Rich. When I was a teenager, I got into comedy. I found it fascinating. Like I got given tickets to go and see Patrick Monaghan for my 14th birthday. I'd never seen like live stand-up before, and I went and enjoyed it, but I didn't really know what stand-up was before I went, and I found it fascinating, like that someone could make a living out of just telling stories and being a bit silly and being a bit daft. And I liked the kind of jeopardy and the uncertainty of it, and I also quite sort of liked that no one can prove that you're good or bad at comedy. I quite like that there's, it's so subjective, and having watched Patrick live, I then decided to go to the same comedy club every week and see whoever was on, and just got super into it. I'd go with friends, but I'd take a notebook and I'd write down who I'd seen and what I thought about them, and I'd try and find more clips of them online, and then watching more comedians. And that was sort of the late noughties. So that was when like comedy was really kind of booming on TV, in terms of it was on telly every night, there was something happening. I then decided to do a gig when I was 16, and I didn't tell anyone that I was doing a gig. I was like really embarrassed that I was doing it, because I thought people might think like, oh, he thinks he's funny, does he? But I'd consumed so much stand-up in the last 2 years. I really wanted to have a go, and I signed up for an open mic night that used to run in Stafford, where I grew up. And I didn't tell the promoter that I was 16. I didn't tell the landlord of the pub I was 16. I turned up for the show 3 hours early because I was so keen. And I turned up into this like empty pub, and the landlord was like, what are you here for? I said, well, I'm one of the comedians. And the landlord sort of looked at me a bit strange, like, why are you here so early? If you travelled from like really far. I was like, no, I live like a mile away. And then he offered me a pint. I didn't realise this, but part of the deal of performing at the open mic night was you got a pint.
Yeah.
So at 16, I was like, yeah, brilliant. I'll have a pint. Yeah, very much. And I think because he sort of assumed I was doing comedy, I must be a bit older. I ended up just sitting at the bar, and I had like 4 or 5 pints of cider. Must have been quite drunk at 16 off 4 or 5 pints of cider. They got up on stage and did like 5 minutes of material about teachers at school and doing my GCSEs and everything, and it went okay. Like the gig went fine. I got laughs and people seemed to enjoy it, and I got a couple of pats on the back. I then immediately had to rush home because I told my mum that I was at a friend's house, so I had to like run back home. Didn't tell anybody. The next day, I text Rob, the guy that ran the gig, and I said, "Thank you so much for having me. I'd love to come back and do it again, like next month or in the future, and write 5 more minutes." And I really had the bug. And then Rob got back and said, "Are you really 16?" I said, "Yeah." And he went, "Well, you're barred from the pub for life."
Oh, mate! Oh no!
Yeah, and that was the only place near me that did comedy, so I had nowhere to perform because I couldn't really travel around the country as much as I wanted to, and I had nobody I told that I did comedy, so it was kind of like a secret thing that happened. And then when I went to university at 18, it kind of at the back of my mind. So I went to Leicester University.
Wow.
Because the comedy scene in Leicester was good, and I knew that was a good place to kind of start out doing comedy. And then in my first week at uni, I did 3 gigs, sort of traveling around. Like I went with the intention of doing it as a career, and was a not very good comedian whilst I was at university for a few years. Then eventually kind of chipped away and got better, and people started offering to pay me a little bit of money and a little bit more money. And by the time I left, I could kind of do it as a job. So
That's
I've never
brilliant.
really had a proper job. Yeah.
That's brilliant. My blog started as a spreadsheet in Carlisle. I was always one for writing lists, and so I wrote down every film I saw, every play I saw, every book I read, and I started writing every comedian I ever saw. And the first comedians we ever saw as a family were Les Dawson in 1974. That's on a holiday in Scarborough. And then a year later, I saw Tommy Cooper, and I got the bug. So I started writing every comedian in every venue I've ever seen, and I had this great long spreadsheet. And I thought, why am I doing this? And then I thought, well, hang on a minute, this might make a diary or something like that. And my friend in Carlisle, who runs her own business, said this is crying out for a blog, and that's how it started, and it just took off. And what's wonderful is it supports new comedians as well as established comedians, and it's wonderful watching them all grow. So when you say you started off just doing a little tiny gig, I'm normally the friend who goes along for the 5 minutes to support the new comedians because I've got the laugh, and I must ensure this laugh. But it's just wonderful to see. And when you said Stafford, I went to college in Stoke-on-Trent. My home city's Carlisle, but I went to college in Stoke, and we saw Ben Elton and saw Julian Clary there. We saw Angela Barnes there kicking off. It's so wonderful watching these these now established comedians start off. So there you are doing your 5-minute gigs in pubs. Is that correct? Is that the way you got in eventually after university?
Yeah. So when I went to, I decided at 16 that I enjoyed it so much that I wanted to do comedy like as a job like that. This is it. That's what I want to do. So I just carried on going to watch as much stuff as I could, and I kept reading everything I could. I read loads of books. I read Frank Skinner's book, which is amazing. His first autobiography. Yeah. If anybody's thinking about doing comedy as a career or has fancied it, I'd recommend that book. It's just so interesting and so much great advice in it, and it's also just really funny, great book anyway. But because I kind of read everything about comedy that was out there, I felt like when I started, I had quite a working knowledge of how the open mic scene worked that a lot of new comedians necessarily don't have, I think. And it meant that it was odd because I was so geeky about comedy. I used to read the comedy forums. So people might not know this listening, watching, but there are like online forums, and comedy works like any other sort of freelance industry where people post gigs. So I kind of realized when I was 16, I thought all comedians were millionaires. I thought if you were on TV, you were a millionaire. I just thought that was what it was. And then I realized on the forums, it's like, oh, you can get a comedian to come to a pub for like 60 quid. And, and also like people who'd been on the forums, like Russell Kane was quite prolific on the forum. Yeah. He was on TV quite a lot. Then you'd see him in a forum going, oh, I've got a gig in Essex tonight. Has anyone got a PA I can borrow? And you'd be like, what? Like, like you're a proper bloke. And it was kind of enlightening to how it works. And it was odd because I was doing the open mic scene.
It's wonderful that it's there, isn't it? That you've got these things, that a communication point that you can go and do all over Britain. If you need a PA in Scotland or whatever, somebody will have one. Yeah,
it's just like a network, and I imagine it's the same for any sort of trade or whatever.
Yeah.
I was kind of so into it that when I was doing open mics, I sort of knew who people were before I'd met them, because I'd seen them on the forums or whatever. So I kind of knew it worked. So I deliberately went out and did like 5-minute spots and 10-minute spots on open mic nights, new act nights, amateur nights. And I was rubbish. I was really bad. Someone should have told me to stop doing comedy because I was pants when I first started. And I was just dying on my arse everywhere, but I really enjoyed doing it. And eventually I kind of cobbled together 5-10 minutes that worked. And then people started inviting me to come back. Oh, you were quite good. You should come back next month or whatever. So I did that. And very annoyingly, there's a video of me on YouTube from my very first year. And I used to try and be quite alternative, a little kind of Paul Foot style. And I wasn't very good at it. And I don't own that video footage. And the person that owns the video will not take it down. It's got like 2,000 views. And it really annoys me because anyone who sort of distantly knows me goes, oh, or like meets me now and goes, oh, you're a comedian. They YouTube me. That one comes up top, and they think that's what I'm like. No, I'm all right now. I promise
I'm
you.
nothing like that.
but and then eventually you kind of get good at it. And then eventually someone said, a guy called Alan Seaman, he's a really nice guy, said, do you want to? And actually, it was quite poetic because Alan Seaman opened for Patrick Monaghan on the very first stand-up gig I ever saw. And he asked me and said, do you want to come and do a gig and I'll pay you like £50 to do like a support slot for someone else because new act 50 quid. I was like, oh yeah, amazing. And then I was like, couldn't believe I'd been paid to do comedy and made a profit on a gig. And even though the profit was like £20 after I paid for my train ticket or whatever,
Doesn't matter.
I was so excited that I can't believe I've done it. And it made me so determined. Then the more you do comedy, the better you get at it. And eventually you kind of cobble together to a level where people pay you okay money and you can start paying some bills. And when I left university, I was making just enough to pay my bills. And I got an office job that I hated. And I'd go into the office every day miserable. And I didn't like the people who worked there. I didn't like what we did. It just made me miserable. And I would wait until 5 o'clock and then drive off to go and do a gig in some far-flung place. And I would have so much fun doing the gig and make a little bit of money and then come home and then be miserable when I get home because I know I've got to go to work the next day. And I looked at how much money I'd made in the previous 3 months. And I thought,
that is so true for me. I'm now in a really good job, but I wasn't in a good job for a while. And comedy, looking forward to comedy or having something that you look forward to, got me through it. And it's exactly that. It's a reason why I go and see a lot, because I love the medium and it's good to go and to have something to look forward to at the end of the day, especially if good people like yourself run the bill. So within your first 5 minutes up to now, really, what do you like to talk about? Is it everyday things? Is it specific themes? How do you work out what you're going to talk about on stage?
Oh, mate, well, my first ever 5 minutes was just a mishmash of anything that might work or get a reaction out of an audience. So in my first 5 minutes, there was a joke about the Welsh language. Right. There was a bit about swallowing and sexual deviance. There was like some prop gags. There was there was no style to it or like vibe. It was just anything that might work squeezed into 5 minutes. Now I like to think that I like telling stories. I like a narrative, and I'm trying at the minute to talk more about like issues. So I've talked, my last show was quite a lot about social class, and it was about kind of poverty, and I found that really kind of satisfying to make quite big subjects funny in a way, make people enjoy them. And I've talked about climate change and like child labour, and I find that like really exciting. I think that's like a challenge to make something big and scary. And I like a naughty laugh. I like making people laugh about something they know they shouldn't laugh about. And I think that's when that happens, it makes me really happy that I've done that to an audience. And I think it's something people remember. I always like people to think, I want people to come to the show and enjoy it. And I don't think comedy should be heavy. It should be fun. That's the one thing. And I hate it when people say, and people do this all the time with comedy, comedy should be about issues, or comedy should challenge, or comedy should be silly, or comedy shouldn't be anything. The only thing comedy should be is funny. But
I was just going to say,
make an audience think about something the next day, and whenever it comes up in the news or whatever, they remember, I remember on Saturday when we saw that comedian. That makes me, I like that. They get something to take away from it. Then that's really good too.
The number one thing is to be funny as soon as you walk out on stage. And once you've got an audience, you can then talk about anything you like and bring in the comedy into the issues and all the rest of it, whatever you want to talk about. But you need some sort of first line that will just kill it, and you're away and you can talk about anything you like. Can you tell me more about your writing process for a routine or a show? Do you make notes? Do you practice on your own beforehand? How do you get it all into your head, what you're going to say?
I mean, process is a grand old term.
I was going to say, do you have one?
There's no set way. I mean, generally at the minute, sort of between August and December is when I write the least. So this is for the benefit of the listener. This was recorded 6 months ago from when you were hearing it. So at the time this goes out, I'll be very much in writing mode in the route to Edinburgh. Yeah. But generally, I've got like a notes app on my phone, and anything that occurs to me when I'm wandering around, or anything that I kind of observe, or whatever, will go into the notes app. And then when it comes to like sort of writing time, which is normally January for me before Leicester Comedy Festival, when I'll do like a new show, like a new hour for the first time, and I'll just write loads. And then I'll make myself go somewhere because I'm rubbish at writing at home. So like, there's a pub I've got a very good relationship with near me where they let me wander around in their function room, and I will talk to myself for hours. I'll have like 3 pints in their function room and talk to myself, walking around in a circle like a maniac, getting slightly tipsy. And then I'll talk to myself, and I'll write a bit down. But it's odd that people call it writing, because I would say the amount of my last show, Love Probably, which was a rom-com, a stand-up rom-com, I'd say that written down was about 50 words. And the show itself, whilst I'd sort of laboured over it and I knew exactly how it was going to go, I'm rubbish at writing down on a notepad, I will say this, then this, then this, and this, and this. And it's more kind of just stage directions of we'll do this, we'll do this, we'll do this. And then it's more kind of muscle memory. And I think the actual jokes themselves, I trust myself that I can tell a joke and I can make a story funny, or I can make an observation funny. And it's the very minor touches that, like, well, I'll do this with my hand at that point, or I will crouch, or I'll jog around, or whatever. And then once that becomes muscle memory, you can just sort of switch into gear and go. And everything else is just organic and live in the moment. And I that's how I prefer to do it. But there are some comics, I don't know how they do it, and they must be maniacs, or I don't know if it's like autism or OCD or something, but there are some comics that have the amazing ability to go to a cafe and stand up on a laptop. And I find that baffling that people can do that, because I just do not have the focus or the concentration to do that, or the memory power to kind of work off that. And I always find, you know, people sometimes do that and it can be quite over rehearsed. I like to be loose and I like to be kind of relaxed, and yeah.
It's a fascinating answer. I've told this story to many comedians I've spoken to. I once had a go at stand-up comedy, and never say never again. But it was in it was for a promoter who I knew, who was organising a gong show for old people, which it just couldn't be worse. And I'd written this script about me being accident prone, driving cars in Carlisle, which I was for a while. I had this script ready, and the promoter said, right. He said, go on. He said, you'd be brilliant. You've got 3 minutes, but you could get gonged off. And I walked out. There's 3 people in the crowd, 3 old fellas. And the first thing I said to them was, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. People think I look like Eddie the Eagle Edwards, the ski jumper, but I can't see the resemblance myself. And of course, when I was at college, I was his double. And as soon as I said this, one old bloke at the back just went, fuck off, and cut me off. And I walked on to my own footsteps, and I thought, what's happening? What's going on? The promoter said, have another go. There's another show. Have another go. Did the same thing. Similar thing happened. And I thought, never say never again, but my place is in the audience. Yeah. It was daunting, but like you, I enjoyed doing it. It's interesting for you to say you enjoy the process of going on stage, whether it's good or bad. I always say to comedians, it's all about surely experience. I can't imagine you ever having a bad gig, but you must do the bad gigs to become the better comedian. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah, 100%. And you've got the one thing I say to new comedians and new acts is you have to remember that nobody is good at comedy when they start. There are some people who are better than others, but nobody is good at stand-up when they start. And it will take, I think, like minimum 3 years to get good at it. And you might be okay at it and you might have some good gigs, but to be good at it where you can work a room and play a room, minimum 3 years, probably realistically more like 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
And you know, and I think anyone can do comedy. Anyone can learn to be a comedian in the same way that anyone can learn to be an electrician. You know, it's a learned skill, and some people will take to it quicker than others, but it's a learned skill. Anyone can get to the point where they are okay at comedy. But I think when you've got to be prepared when you first start that you're going to die on your ass a few times, and what will make you better is being big enough to look at why that happened. Comedians love to blame an audience or blame a room or like, oh, the microphone was doing it. Yeah.
There's always something. Yeah.
Most of the time, it is either your fault or in part it was your fault. You weren't good enough to handle whatever was presented to you, whatever problem it was. I mean, I had some absolute shockers when I was early doors, and when I started, I wasn't very good. But when I started to improve, because I was quite young, and there were a lot on the TV. There was like Russell Howard, Russell Kane, John Richardson, a lot of like Matt Richardson, a lot of like young men who wore t-shirts and skinny jeans. People got very excited about me because I was a young man who wore a t-shirt and skinny jeans, and people thought, oh, he's cobbling it together. And I got a lot of opportunities given to me before I was ready. And it really, really cost me in the end, because I'd only been doing comedy like 18 months, but I got put on some quite big gigs that I just wasn't good enough to handle. And I died on my ass. And it meant that the people who were there, the promoters and the agents that were there, saw me and went, oh, he's not very good. And that cost me for years. There were a lot of people who wouldn't book me because they'd seen me when I was, you know, like not ready. And in their heads, I was not ready. And even though like years had passed, and it's only kind of now some of those promoters and clubs are like booking me again and going, oh, okay, yeah, you've learned how to do it. I mean, I got booked to do Jongleurs, if you remember Jongleurs. Or people
used to go many a time, yeah.
Yeah, you know, it was like a big weekend club. They were nearly always like in nightclubs. They were a national chain. They had them in most of the big cities of England. And Wales and Scotland, but they were quite often rowdy, and they were often promoted to stag do's and hen do's. And I got booked to do a Jongleurs in just like late November, coming up to Christmas. And I got to the green room, and it was like just amazing comedians, like really, really good. All of them have been on TV. All of them have been doing comedy for like 15 years. None of them knew who I was. Of course they didn't. I was like some kid that got booked on this gig. And the show manager came into the dressing room and she said, oh, we've got 18 stag do's in tonight. There's a room of about 300 people, and nearly all of them are a stag do or a hen do or a birthday party. And I've never seen a gig before since that was as rowdy or crazy. Like, honestly, it was Birmingham City Centre. I think Aston Villa had played Birmingham that day as well. It was there'd been a huge football match, and it'd been really controversial. The lad was out in football or in the pub all day. And the opening act, who was like a TV comedian, died on his hole. Like it got nothing out of him. And then Adam Bloom was supposed to be headlining. For some reason, they switched Adam into the middle. Adam Bloom's an amazing comic. He's so good live. He's just an absolute like pro.
Yeah.
And the compere brought him on, and the audience were baying for blood. And he just there was a big stag do on the front row, and it was like, stag, stand up. And he had the stag dressing down, and the room erupted. And then it was the next one, stag, stand up, gave him a dressing down, sit down. You know, office Christmas party. Where's the boss? Got the boss to stand up. It was like a gladiator in combat. It was amazing. It was an absolute masterclass in how to deal with a rowdy room. And the 20 minutes just flew by, standing ovation. And then Adam came off stage, put his coat on. See you later. Good night. Have a good one. And the compere went, keep that applause going for your next act, Alex Hylton. And I walked out, and honestly, before I got to the microphone, I heard the word cunt shouted at me 3 times.
Oh, mate!
And it was just like, I had like maximum 10 minutes of material that I could use. And I'd never been heckled before, because new material night, new act nights are always like very friendly and cuddly environments. And I'd never even had a single heckle before. I had like one heckle put down that I'd had rehearsed, that I'd sort of meekly said into the microphone. And it got like an okay reaction from the crowd. But then by the time I'd said it, I'd been heckled like 25 times more. And I just tried to do my material that I had. And it didn't work. I think after about 90 seconds, I said into the microphone, I think everybody here hates me. And the roof came off. So I think everybody here hates me. And it was like, yeah.
Well, at least you got them on your side.
Yeah.
Oh, mate. That I mean, that must be challenging, I think is the word, because do you just think, well, I've got to do 10 minutes, and you're performing to a wall, really. You can't really see the audience because you don't know what they're going to be doing or saying. It's fascinating.
I mean, in that scenario, I sort of worked out that the promoter would probably prefer that I got off the stage faster than I did like the 10 minutes that I've been booked for. So they would prefer me to do as little as possible. So I walked off. But there's also, it doesn't happen very often that you die in your arse now. I had a rough one a few weeks ago, and you kind of just have to settle in and remind yourself that nearly always isn't going as bad as you think it is in that moment. If you think a gig isn't going very well, the worst thing you can do is tell an audience, because if an audience might be enjoying it, but they're a bit quieter or more subdued or whatever, or quite often if you're on like a high stage, you can't really hear them very well. So they're having more fun than you think they are, and you might watch a video back or, whatever. And I've had gigs where they've been a bit quiet, and then you're walking back to your car and people want to have a photo with you, and they go, "Oh, that was amazing, mate. We really enjoyed it." Like, well, why didn't you tell me when I was up there for ages? But you kind of like have to reassure yourself and be rational. But also, I think the second that you tell an audience, "Oh, this isn't going very well," you're giving them an option for them to go, "Yeah, it isn't, mate. Fuck off." So,
I think that's true. I think obviously the majority of people who pay to see a comedy night are there to see the comedian and are not there to heckle or to hear anybody else. And the famous story that comes to mind is the Ken Dodd one, where he used to describe Freud's theory of laughter, and he would describe laughing very elongated, like Freud would say, and then at the end of it, he said, "Mind you, ladies and gentlemen, Freud never played Glasgow Empire on a Friday night because it was infamous for being a bad venue." And so it's fascinating to listen to you say this.
Have you ever heard the story of Saint Genesius?
No, carry on.
So Saint Genesius is the patron saint of stand-up comedians, believe it or not. He was a real dude. He's the patron saint of actors and comedians and performers, and he lived in ancient Rome. In I think like the 2nd or 3rd century AD, and he was a street performer, and he used to write plays, and he used to make fun of Christians. Genesius hated Christians, and all of his shows would make fun of Christians and Christianity, and would pay respect to the old Roman gods. And he was incredibly popular, and thousands of people would flock to see him perform on the streets. And the only person in ancient Rome that hated Christians more than Genesius was the emperor himself. And when the emperor heard about this comedian that was making fun of Christians, he booked Genesius to perform a private show for the emperor and his friends. And just before Genesius goes on stage to perform for the emperor in this private show, God spoke to Genesius. And Genesius had this dawning moment where he realized that Christianity was the one true way and Jesus was God's son on earth. And he realized that the old Roman religion was a myth. And he walked out on stage and he greeted the emperor, and he declared himself to be a Christian, and he rejected the old Roman gods. And the emperor was absolutely furious, and he had Genesius dragged away and crucified, and he was never heard from again. And it's a fascinating story. Wow. And it's the most important thing that comedians take from the legend of Genesius is never do new material at important gigs, because if you're doing a corporate gig for the emperor, stick to your tried and tested. Don't try your new Jesus stuff. Wait until a new act material night somewhere.
That
But
is that
the
is
thing that I find
obviously.
most fascinating about Genesius is that he's the patron saint of actors, comedians, and he's also the patron saint of graphic designers and printers, because it seems that even in ancient Rome, comedians had to have some sort of side hustle to keep going. You can't just live on the comedian patron saint money. You've got to do something else as well.
That is obviously folklore, that story in the comedy world. That is amazing. When you walk on stage or just before a gig, do you still get nervous? Do you ever get nervous? And how do you deal with your nerves?
Very occasionally, yeah. If I've got a lot kind of riding on a gig, like there's a big promoter there who can book me for a lot of work. Like I need to do well. I can stress myself out a bit. But I always try and think that if I run like my own gig in Leicester, and it's my favourite gig to run because I know most of the audience, they're all regulars, and I'm just so chilled. And I have a beer and I mess around, and I book the acts that come on, so I compare, have a laugh, and I'm super relaxed. And I always do well. I always have a nice time, and I walk on stage super chilled, and I have the most fun, and I bring an act on that I think is really funny, and it's a favourite thing. And whenever I get worried or stressed before a gig, I just think, well, if I was doing my own gig, I wouldn't be worried. So why should I be worried at somebody else's gig? I know that I can do this. And I think telling yourself that is, I have weird superstitions. I always write. I mean, I gigged last night, I don't know if you can see, but I always write my set on my hand, and I never look at it, but I find that to be quite sort of therapeutic.
Quite reassuring that it's there.
Yeah, I normally have a bottle of beer on stage as well. I don't drink before I go on stage, but I normally like a bottle of beer because I find that I like relaxing. I find like holding a bottle of beer in itself to be, and I think the stance when you've got a microphone in one hand and a bottle of beer in the other, I find that makes me quite chilled out. But that's probably just a psychological thing. I don't eat before I go on stage because I'll be sick normally, because I pace around a lot before I go on stage like a caged lion, and then on stage I run around a lot. So if I've eaten, I normally get off stage and then I'm sick all the time, like sick immediately.
Oh,
which
God.
is weird when you're doing
Would you say that as you walk onto a stage, as soon as you speak into the microphone, the nerves go because you're ready with your set? Is that true to say?
Yeah. I mean, if I'm enjoying it, yeah. Like there are some audiences where it's easy, and you click into gear the second you get on stage. In that first 5 seconds, you're like, oh, this is going to be great fun, and you chill out and you can relax and you can play. There are some audiences where it's more like work, and you think, if an audience don't trust you, and then it becomes like, okay, I can't let my guard down here. I have to like watch you like a hawk, and then you have to consciously think on stage, what are they going to like? What should I talk about next? Because I might have a plan. This was the set that I was going to do, but if this audience are, they don't like swearing, or they don't want me to talk about politics, or they don't want me to talk about this, or or if they didn't like a joke early on, I might think, right, well, I'm not going to do those jokes later on. And you have to constantly think about that. And sometimes you think an audience might not be paying a lot of attention, so you think, right, I've got to be bigger now. I've got to run around and shout and louder and make myself kind of look at me, I'm over here, that kind of thing. And those shows, not necessarily nerve-wracking, but it's work. Like, you're having to consciously kind of focus on it. And I think you find out about an audience within, sometimes before you've got to the microphone, between that's the little walk the first day. You go, all right, it's going to be like this, is it? And they're not necessarily bad gigs. They're just, different, I guess. And it's, and that's where the skill lies of just doing it loads. So you kind of find out, okay, that's what it's going to be.
I wanted to ask you more about how you remember your routines. You say you've got your set on your hands. Is there any other way? How do you remember all the material as you say it on stage? Does it just come second nature?
Yeah, it's muscle memory. It builds. So it's really rare that I will write like a 5-minute bit straight off the bat. It's normally, I'll have like an observation or something like funny that I think, and I'll go and do that at an open mic night, and I'll play around with it. and riff and just say it out loud and see what happens. And then I might have like a minute worth of jokes, and it's really easy to remember a minute worth of jokes. But then the more that I start saying that minute worth of jokes, I will improvise gradually over a period of time, like another line that goes on top of it, another line that goes on top of it. And then I might, come up with something live in the moment and just say it on that stage for an audience because it feels good, especially if I'm having fun and it's a nice gig. You think, yeah, I'll try this and see where it goes. And I can normally, when you're in that mode, you can make anything funny. And it kind of builds. And then once you get used to saying it, you don't ever have to sit and learn it or whatever, because it just becomes, like, okay, we're doing that bit now. And it's no way to how you might tell a story in the pub or over a dinner table, is you don't consciously think, oh, what do I say next? You just remember the story and you remember how it goes. And you kind of, because everything I say on stage makes me laugh and I think it's funny, I've got exactly my sense of humor, is it's very easy to remember because I remember the things that I think are funny. And I don't have to worry too much about this exact word I'm going to say or whatever, because it just all clicks into gear. I wish I had something to tell you. I wish I was like, oh, there's this muscle memory trick and you just do this, but it's just, it comes to you naturally, I guess.
The reason why I asked the question is that I saw you at the Leicester Comedy Festival in 2022, and I'm just in the process of booking up for the 2023 one. I know this is going to go out May time, something like that, the recording, but Comedy Festival's in February. And what was particularly impressive about your act was your enthusiasm and your, as you say, you're running around on stage and your willingness to make an audience laugh. And when I very kindly met you after the show, you looked absolutely shattered. And I think you'd said to me you'd been working on about 3 or 4 shows per day, all different sorts of things, which is amazing, and an amazing rate. So I just wanted to say congratulations, because I found you exceptionally funny just comparing, and I'm looking forward very much to seeing your full show very soon, hopefully at Leicester. But the enthusiasm was through the roof. It was extraordinary. So well done.
Oh, cheers, man. I appreciate that. I think you got to give it some, ain't you? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Have a run at it, and if you're tired or you're upset about something, I think an audience can feel that, and you really have got to like front it out and put on a show. And I do, like to click into gear, and I think be as big as possible and paint people pictures. And I mean, Leicester Festival's like my favourite time of the year, because I live in Leicester, and something I do during the festival is I run an organisation called Jokes on Us. So we produce shows at 3 or 4 venues throughout the festival. It's about 125 shows over the festival, and we have comedians come to their show. All of our shows are pay what you want, so audiences can come and see the show and they pay what they feel the show is worth. So it's open to everyone. So if people haven't got very much money, they can still come and see a comedy night, and it really works. But it also means over the 3 weeks of the festival, I get on stage like 40 or 50 times to compare and do little bits, and I really, really enjoy it. Like, I love every minute of it, but it is absolutely exhausting. And it's quite often, we have shows that start at 12 o'clock at lunchtime, and then we get off stage at midnight in the evening.
Yeah.
And then you tend to go for a pint afterwards.
It was extraordinarily good to meet you after the show, because you were still on a high, even although you were shattered. And I think that's the thing. You've got to keep going. Let's move on to Edinburgh, because my holiday every year, I'm very lucky to be able to go to the Edinburgh Fringe every year. And the only 2 I missed were the 2 during the pandemic, but I've been going every year since 2005. And I go and see, in accordance of about 50 shows in a week. And I'm shattered at the end of it. I'm absolutely exhausted, but it's the best experience. And now I've branched out more into going to more fringes, like the Leicester Comedy Festival, like the Brighton Fringe, like the Hastings Fringe, etc. Can you tell me what your first ever Edinburgh Fringe was like? What year was it? What were you doing there?
I very briefly made an appearance in what would it be? I think it was 2015.
Right.
Might have been. I think when I was in the semi-finals of So You Think You're Funny, like a big national comedy competition.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. I went up and did that, and that was the first time I saw Edinburgh as a festival. And I stayed for like 2 nights, one night to go do the show, and then one night to go and just see shows and be an audience member and see what the Fringe was like. And I loved it so much. The city is beautiful, and just the excitement and the bubble of the festival during festival time. I was like, right, I've got to come here next year. So I went up with Sarah Keyworth. I'm sure you're aware of Sarah. Yeah, so we did what's known as a two-hander, and we split an hour show. And I'd had the same girlfriend since I was a child, like all the way through school and stuff like that, and then through university. And then we'd just broken up on the same day that Sarah came out. So we decided to do a show called Chasing Tails, because for the first time in our lives, we were both trying to meet women. And that was the theme of the show. So it was about kind of dating and a bit about sexuality. And it was a really, really good fun, like hour-long show split between two of us. And we were both kind of writing every day and trying new little bits out. And the show was really, really, really well attended. And the best thing about that was I did all the marketing for the show. So we had like different responsibilities, you know, but I said I will write the press release and invite reviewers to come and see it and try and get us maybe some interviews to promote the show. And because of the subject matter, I wrote to a gay blog, you know, and we suddenly started getting listed as one of the top 10 gay shows to see at the Fringe, because there weren't that many shows with LGBTQ acts at the festival that year. So suddenly we were on the top 10 gays because people wanted to see Sarah. And I also wrote to a blog similar to this one that reviewed women in comedy. And I sent them the press release going, Alex Hylton and Sarah Keyworth are doing the show, and here are the themes, and it'd be great if you could come, and you know, it's at this venue at this time. And they'd obviously not read the press release properly, because they just put us into the top 10 women to see at the Edinburgh Festival. But they included both me and Sarah, and I guess they'd assumed that Alex must also be a woman. And it was weird because I was number 5 and Sarah was number 6. And even though Sarah ended up on TV in like a year after that Fringe, I was the slightly better woman on the bill at that show. I mean, it was being misgendered, which was unfortunate, but it did put a lot of bums on seats. We sold out most of the run. I was quite happy to have an audience of very confused feminists come to the show that wanted to see a female comedian. But it was a great fun that year. And then I went back a year with kind of another show, and just I love the festival. I love the opportunity to go and see loads of stuff. I mean, much like you, Rich, I used to keep track of every show I've seen. But on the wall, as you can see it, this is the spare bedroom. But this was my pride and joy when I was like 19. But that's every ticket I went to go and see. So there's tickets on there that I put onto like one big board and kept a hold of. I've got one that's 100 times the size of this, but so there's various of all the ones in kind of pink and purple. I'll try and walk it over.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so all the ones in kind of pink and purple are Stafford Theatre, and then there's Chris Ramsey there going on the autograph of him, and was that Rod Gilbert, Leslie Hunter, and various other stuff. But you come here,
that's kind of brilliant, mate. How fantastic is that?
Yeah, and then there's like maybe some quite recent ones there, but then like that. So Carl Donnelly,
I recognise those tickets. Yeah,
but that would have been the day after I was at So You Think You're Funny, because I went to go and see Carl Donnelly the day afterwards. That was my first Fringe, I think.
Right.
And then there's like Jack D's like 10 years ago and stuff like that. And,
yeah.
But then also people that I've got on there that since became Jimmy Tarbuck's on there. We've
all seen him. He's brilliant.
Yeah. Like I've got like a handwritten ticket to Josh Pugh.
Wow. That's fantastic. That's
I
so
feel like
good.
that'll be something that you dig out in a couple of years when Josh is doing arenas or whatever. You go, oh
Yeah,
yeah, I saw
yeah,
him
yeah.
five. I do a work in progress here.
That's brilliant, mate. I'm so pleased with that. That's great.
Yeah.
So you do solo shows as well. You went up onto solo shows, did you, at Edinburgh? So you did your half hour with Sarah Keyworth, and then the following year was your first solo show. Is that right?
Yes, the following year I did what's known as a coward's hour. So I did 45 minutes because if you do an hour, you're eligible for all the awards and the reviews. And I didn't feel like I was ready to do that, but I wanted the experience of doing the full run. So I did a 45-minute show called I Came, I Saw, I Complained, which was basically kind of every joke I'd ever written in one show. And I had really, really good fun doing that. I loved doing it and got the bug. Went back with a show called Get Rich or Die Crying, which was my first debut show, and it was about sort of chasing my dreams and feeling like I'd put so much at risk for comedy, and I really wanted it to work. And that went quite well at Edinburgh. It was well reviewed and what have you, and then it went to Leicester Comedy Festival and it won Best Show at Leicester, which was
Well
nice.
done,
The last time I ever did it. And it won Best Show at Leicester, and then comedy was cancelled in 2020. It was like the last festival before the pandemic. My current show is called Love Probably. Well, actually, at the time this goes out, that will be my last show. Love Probably with stand-up.com, and the show that I'm working on now, which I'll be taking to Edinburgh 23. The working title at the time we're performing is Alex Hylton Performer. But I'm playing around with a few show titles. But it's going to be, I'm really excited about that show. I want it to be, I've realized I've been performing for a third of my life now. And it's the most important thing that I have. But also, there's nothing, I don't own anything in my life that is older than 9 years, really. I don't have anything that is, I have no relationships other than my parents that I have sort of been doing. I've been doing comedy for longer than I was at school and longer than all these other things. I've never worked any other job for this long, and I kind of want to explore what it's done to me and all the things that I've given up and some really nice relationships have cost because of comedy. And I've got no money all the time because any money I make from comedy I invest in taking shows to the Edinburgh Fringe or
that's so good.
Orchard Fiesta, yeah. So
it's so good. That sounds great.
Yeah, cheers, man. And this year I will cross into my 10th. October 23 will be 10 years since I've done comedy, which is
wow.
Crazy.
Other than my blog, the most creative thing I ever did was write a play, which me and my mate put on for Comic Relief. And originally it was I wanted to do it for the Edinburgh Fringe, and I'll probably resurrect it. It's called The Applicant, and it's basically about me coming down to London from Carlisle, trying to find a job, and I've never had a job interview before. And it was basically I would run on stage. It would monologue. I would look at the audience. I was in the waiting room, and I just started talking to the audience. And then the interview would come on and interview me, and the next one would come on. I kept getting rejected for the jobs, and there's a lot of plot to it. But by the end of it, I get given my ideal job, and just as I get given the job, the interviewer kills me. So the last scene is the guy at the gates of heaven or hell or whatever, and he's being interviewed by God, saying, "We've been watching you on planet Earth, and we think the ideal job for you is the job of interview corpses." And I just shake my hands and the lights go out. So we're busy rehearsing this, and I wrote the thing, ran out the first night. We did 3 shows. First time I ran out after 10 weeks. I forgot the monologue, and I was just like a rabbit in headlights. And I just thought, what am I doing? And everybody was looking and everything. But as soon as my mate came on, he was all the interviewers. It was easy to pick it up again. And like talking to you about putting things on at Edinburgh, getting shows on, talking to you about confidence and nerves and everything. It's all part and parcel of it in the whole analysis of comedy.
Yeah, massive. And it's Edinburgh it's like the trade show for comedians and performers, but it's also really, really, really fun. And I think you have to remember when you're there that it is work, and you're there for a reason, and it's very expensive to go to Edinburgh, and you need to make your show as good as it can and be the best. But it's also the biggest party on earth, and anybody listening or watching that's never been to the Fringe, I recommend it to anyone. There is something for everybody there, and it's an arts festival, but it's inclusive in many ways. And whether you just want to see stand-up comedians doing observations, or you want to see the wackiest, most alternative out there stuff, it's there. You want to see dance or theatre or music, there's all this kind of amazing stuff happening. I mean, I love it. I think the greatest example of how comedians view the Fringe, and I won't name them because it's not my story to tell, but I will share it with you. Where when I first started, and I went to the Fringe, I went to go and support a lot of the other kind of new comedians that were going to the Fringe that you make friends with on the circuit year round, and you go and see everybody. And there was a really, really, really good act in Birmingham, but he primarily was an actor that had kind of gone into comedy, and he wrote a play, and he last minute, and he invited one of the other acts from the new act scene to be in the play. And the play was about a father and son, and the actor that had written it was a really talented actor, and he really, really cared about the Fringe, and he was very stressed and very serious. But the acts that he had invited to be in the play with him was basically just saw it as one opportunity to get drunk for a month. And the play was staged, I think, at like 10:30 at night, late for a theatre show, and quite a serious theatre show about a father and son. And it wasn't ever written into the script, but the play became about an alcoholic father. That's what you got from it, because Dave, the other act, would just drink all day during the Fringe and enjoy being at a festival. And by the time his own play would start, he would be absolutely steaming. So there was nothing in the play that ever said the father was an alcoholic, but it was that's what the show ended up being about. But there would be a scene right at the end of the play where the father is sat down in the kitchen, and the son, the gay son, would come out and would speak a sort of 2-minute monologue, and it'd be a really powerful speech. And the father would sit in the chair, dumbfounded, silent introspection. But the older acts that would drink all day, in that 2 minutes of sat down on a chair, would quite often fall asleep. So the final line of the monologue was supposed to be whispered, but he would have to shout it to wake him up. So this is quite a poignant moment of coming out, acting beautifully. We'll end up with, "Isn't that right, Dad?"
That is brilliant. That is brilliant. In my script, I have a very successful girlfriend. And of course, with me, she's in London, and with me not coming down from Carlisle, hasn't got a job. That's the reason why I obviously want a job. But the best thing I wrote was his name, because he used to get a load of rejection letters. His name was Norman Oliver Hope, so it would be Dear N.O. Hope, and that would always get a laugh. And I thought, this is for Edinburgh. This is for me. Anyway, let's move on. It is the most remarkable festival, and I'll keep going as long as I can keep moving. It's just amazing. Who are your favourite comedians, past and present? Did you watch comedy growing up in Stafford?
Yeah, I mean, as you've seen on the thing, I used to watch anything that came to Stafford, and I go to the Fringe and see as much stuff as I can. I think there's so many people that I love watching. I really, really enjoy Glenn Wool. I think Glenn Wool's an amazing storyteller. I love watching Carl Donnelly.
He's brilliant.
I think Carl Donnelly is someone that I'm always surprised when the show finishes. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like, oh, was that an hour? Well, that's flown by, and it's like a lovely man just to spend an hour with.
He's been on here. He was amazing as a guest on here. He's such a good comic, and like you say, it's the originality of him as well.
Yeah, absolutely. He's so, and he just a great storyteller. And I always think with Carl, he would have made a great caveman. telling stories around the fire. You know, that kind of vibe of like regaling anecdotes and little avenues your stories go off on. I think that's, you know, he's lovely.
Yeah.
There's so many acts that I enjoy watching. I like a lot of the American guys. I think what Bill Burr is doing is incredible. I think you know, he's a much maligned kind of person in terms of people, you know, does he go too far or whatever? But I think Bill Burr is always the example of people when if you're good enough, you can say whatever you want on stage. And I think it's the perfect antidote to the kind of the cancel culture crowd that think, oh, well, you can't say anything anymore. Well, Bill Burr shows you can. And actually, quite a lot of the times when a comedian gets called out for saying something offensive, it's because it wasn't very funny. And if they, you know, you can say whatever you want. And he shows that you can say some terrible, horrible things on stage, but an audience will go with you if you are technically brilliant as he is. And I aspire to that in a way. I think that if you can talk about something and make an audience talk about something difficult, but you can be, I think that's a real skill that's underrated in many ways. You know, and then I mean, Sean Locke was amazing. You know, Sean Locke was great.
God bless him.
Yeah, I watch, I'd say about once a month, I'll watch, like, getting caught into a stream of Sean Locke clips online. I think Beck Hill's so inventive.
With the drawings.
I'm so jealous of her, like, organic creative talent. You know, she's doing amazing things.
That's brilliant. I mean, who haven't I seen? I was saying from Les Dawson, Tommy Cooper, Ken Dodd, two Ronnies in the 70s, through to the alternatives in the 80s. The comedy. I used to go to the Comedy Store all the time. The first bill I ever saw at the Comedy Store in something like 1988, something like that. It was Phil Jupitus, Linda Smith, Richard Morton, John Maloney, and top of the bill was a comedian called Charles Fleischer, who was very visual, American guy. And he was never heard of again because he went to voice Roger Rabbit in Hollywood. So it was extraordinary to see things like that. But I mean, French and Saunders, Frank Skinner, Steve Coogan, on and on and on. And I remember watching Peter Kay on a bill of 5 acts in a little tiny club in Manchester, and he was fourth on the bill. And I laughed so hard at him, I missed the 5th act. And I said to my mate, I said, he's going to be a superstar. And watching them develop, there's a funny story about Harry Hill. I first saw him 30 years ago downstairs at the King's Head, and he brushed past me, jumped up onto the stage, and he said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really sorry I'm late for the show. I had to have a testicle brought down," and paused and got a laugh. And then he said, "From Derby." And when I met him 30 years later, he said, "Oh, Rich," he said, "I keep telling that story now. It's great, isn't it?"
Oh, sweet.
Who doesn't like Harry Hill? But there is so many. Like me, do you go to a lot of gigs as a member of the audience, either as a comedian or not? You've shown me all your tickets on the wall.
Certainly not as much as I used to. I will say, mostly because I'm normally like working myself. So like most comedy happens on a Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, which I've sort of normally got a gig myself. And then if I've got like a Saturday off, I will normally do something that's not comedy. It always feels weird because like I go out with my girlfriend if I get a Saturday night off. She's a civilian, she works 9 to 5. So I get a Saturday night off, we'll go and do something. And I always feel like, should we go to comedy tonight? It's like, do you want to come to work with me? You know, it feels so when I'm in Edinburgh, I really enjoy it. I go and see a couple of shows a day if I can, and see people I don't normally get to see. During Leicester Festival, I see loads of stuff. And, if someone comes to town on a Monday or a Tuesday or a Wednesday, I will. Jack Campbell, who's a very, very funny comedian, runs like a new material night in Leicester once a month, and on a Tuesday night. And if I'm available, I'll like pop in and say hello and see who's on.
If you're on a bill of acts, would you stay and watch all the acts?
It depends. If I can, I will.
Yeah.
Like if I can, I will. But you know, like last night was great. I was like an hour drive from home, so stayed and watched the headline acts, and you know, you chill out and have a beer, and it's really nice. But if you're 2.5 hours drive from home and you've opened and you think I can get home before they start closing motorways and whatever, you kind of, it has to be a really, really good headline act to keep it if you've got a 2.5 hour drive home. And there's a handful of people that I will stay and watch if that's the prospect. But generally, you start the practicality of it, and you know, the late nights and the early mornings and so on. You think, yeah, probably I'll get out here. You know,
the reason why I ask those questions is that there's a section in my blog called "The Ones That Got Away," and I've written about 25 acts who have either passed on or haven't had a chance to see. And top of the tree for me was Morecambe and Wise. I would love to have seen them live. They're the reason why this blog exists. But also up there is Dave Allen, Bob Monkhouse. I've never seen what's he called? Ross Noble. Amazingly, I've never seen him live. I just haven't had the chance, and I hear he's an incredible actor.
Yeah.
And there's so many, and of course it's forever evolving. So the blog will be here as long as comedy is, hopefully, and as long as I can keep doing it. I've so much enjoyed chatting to you. You've been a wonderful guest. Is there anything else you would like to say before we go? Have you got any? Have you got a podcast? Are you writing books? Have you got a tour coming up? Anything like that?
If all goes well, I will be at Edinburgh this year, Edinburgh 23.
23,
so my show may or may not be called Alex Hylton Performer, but if you go to Edinburgh, do come and see me. I think tickets will be on sale when this comes out, so I'll be somewhere up there. I'm on Twitter as Alex Paris Hylton and Instagram as well. And I run a monthly comedy night in Leicester at 45 West. So do come to that if you are in the East Midlands. It's a really good night. Well,
good man. I will definitely see you in Leicester in 2023, and I'll definitely see your show in Edinburgh as well. I think you're a major comic talent. You've made me laugh so much when I've seen you live, and I just want to thank you for your time today. Thanks so much. All the best to you.
Nice one. Let's go for a pint in Leicester.
Definitely, mate. Thank you so much.